It is 12 o'clock sharp, and we'd like to keep this on schedule so you can get back to your business at 1:30 and respect the time of our panelists and everyone who is here. Thank you all for coming to this Lunch and Learn event sponsored by the Kent County Prevention Coalition. This is the third in our series of Lunch and Learn events. We've had two previous, one on synthetic marijuana and synthetic drugs, and the second one was on marijuana and the cost of marijuana and legalization and medical marijuana and all that stuff. So we welcome you to this third installment of our Lunch and Learn series, and we're very happy to see you all here braving the rain to get here. We want to say a special thank you to our panelists who have arrived from places near and places far, all the way from Ann Arbor. So we're very excited to hear from them this afternoon. Special thank you to Val Lego from WZZM for moderating the panel here today. So I think everyone knows where the bathrooms are. You have like a half hour to figure that out. So if you don't know where they are, just go out behind the wall that's across the hall, and the restrooms are right there. We'll be doing a brief icebreaker here with Michelle Stitt and Rachel Van Horn from the Health Department to kind of get you up and active and moving around and thinking about some microaggressions that we experience on a daily basis. So I'm going to turn that over to them. I just want to thank you. We'll be back here in a minute with Val to kick off the panel, but I'll turn it off to Michelle and Rachel.
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. So, good afternoon, everyone. We'll try it again. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Much better, you're awake. All right. I want to make sure that the lunch hasn't settled and made you sleepy and all that good stuff, so make sure we're awake and alert. So, as Brian said, my name is Michelle Stitt, and I serve as Artistic Director for the Kent County Prevention Coalition. And in preparation for today's Race, Culture, and Health event, we came across an activity that was conducted by a group of students out of Fordham University in North Carolina. This particular activity has to deal with racial microaggressions. And the definition is there, but I'll read through it to familiarize us all so we're all on the same page. But microaggressions, it's a term used to refer to brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults towards people of color. So, and then it cites the individual who coined the term there, and just that it was coined back in the 70s. But just by a show of hands, who has heard of racial microaggressions? Who's familiar with that term? Okay, cool. So we've got some newbies on board and some veterans, which is a good thing. In preparation for today, like I said, we've done a lot of, had a lot of conversations as a planning team for today's event about how to be able to engage the folks who attend today in this conversation about race and kind of what angle we want to come from. And we want you to consider this. We want you to consider what microaggressions have you experienced, have you witnessed, or perpetuated? And we'll get into a bit of discussion about that. All too often, people think that certain issues are issues that belong to another community or another environment. And it was important to us to not just get up here and say, hey, we're inspired by this activity done at Fordham University. We inspired by that particular activity where students used poster boards, simple poster board and Sharpies to be able to highlight different microaggressions that they've experienced, witnessed, or perpetuated. And sort of to be able to kind of bring it home and bring it to Kent County, we engaged a group of students here locally at City High School in an activity much like the one that we had seen at Fordham University. This particular we facilitated this particular activity with a group of about 50 to 60 students. We chose kind of our top 5 or 6 that we thought would resonate with the group as a whole. And so we're going to go ahead and share some of those with you. And a bit later in our time up here, we'll engage you in a similar activity. But all the while, I want you to keep in mind this conversation about, or this sort of thought about what microaggressions have you witnessed, experienced, or perpetuated. So what you will see, what follows, is this particular activity with the City High students. So I'll read them. Some of them are a little bit light, but so this young woman has been told or has been asked, so if you're from Africa, do you speak African? So we'll kind of alternate back and forth. Rachel and I will.
And this one resonates with me. That's why it's perfect that I'm reading this. You have a butt that would make a black man stare.
She says, you don't like watermelon, but you're black? Like, how can that be?
Just because my name is Andre doesn't mean I'm black.
Simply put, you're Asian? Like, there's a certain Asian look, and clearly whoever asked didn't feel that she had that or exuded that.
So, did you jump the fence or cross the river? And he is, I'm guessing they assumed that he identifies himself as Hispanic or Latino.
So people are microaggressed hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, and we want to, like I said, we want to be able to engage you in a similar activity. Because we feel it's important, if we're talking race, culture, and health, to be able to kind of have a bit of a dialogue about this whole conversation about race. And in the similar way that the City High kids, when we went in, we kind of set the tone to make sure it was kind of a safe environment and to make sure they felt comfortable to share. And a lot of interesting conversations transpired from individuals who had a whole plethora of stories and microaggressions that they had experienced. But then conversely, there were individuals who couldn't think of anything, and we kind of had to ask them a lot of questions about, different generalizations that have been made about them, or stereotypes that have kind of been put on them. So Rachel and I want to engage you in this activity a bit, and there are materials that we'll get to in just a minute. But we don't want to engage you in an activity and ask you to be vulnerable without doing so ourselves. So we will share, there's that. We are prepared to share and be vulnerable ourselves with our thing, if you will, microaggressions that we have heard, that we've experienced, that are not so fun, but are real. So mine is, you don't talk like a normal black person. So I don't know exactly what a normal black person is. If any of you know, feel free to see me afterwards and clue me in. I don't know what that is or what that looks like. I know I speak like Michelle. I know Michelle speaks much like this. And yeah, so that's mine. As recent as, I got it a lot when I was younger, but as recent as about a year ago, there was an individual who I talked to on the phone and then ended up having to be on her doorstep to drop paperwork off to her. And in dropping off paperwork, she came to the door and she kind of was looking like, wait, this is not the lady I talked to on the phone. And she asked, are you the lady I talked to on the phone? And I said, yes. And she was like, oh, I thought I was talking to a white lady. And I'm like, no, I'm Michelle, just Michelle, here's your paperwork, I'm ready to go. So that's mine. I'll let Rachel share hers.
So I'm Rachel Van Horn from the health department. I do health education. And I work in, one of the many things that I do, I work in health equity and social justice dialogue workshops. And it's really important to understand that being white does not preclude me from receiving microaggressions, just like anybody else in this room that identifies themselves as white. And we're not the only ones that perpetuate microaggressions either. Everybody does it. This is not unfortunately, racial microaggressions are not really come down to who it is or what your race is. It's everybody receives them, everybody sends them out, and and to point out that they're intentional and oftentimes unintentional. We don't realize what we're saying, how it can sound or how it can mean or how it can have that underlying message. Teresa Branson is my mentor with the health equity and social justice, and she has the best analogy for microaggressions that I've thought of, or that I've come across. And she says that microaggressions are kind of like little pokes. And I always think of it when she used that analogy as my older brother, because that's what my older brother would do, poke. And one poke by itself doesn't hurt. 2 pokes doesn't really hurt. But if you poke in the same area for long enough, it really starts to hurt. It really, you get a bruise there. And being that I don't know if it's that I'm white or just my life experiences, where I went to school, where I grew up, it could be a combination of all those things. I get poked, but my pokes are so few and far between that they don't form a bruise. Many people, people of color, when they get those microaggressions, those pokes do become a bruise. It is an hourly, daily occurrence for them. I don't have that experience, but I have had them. So mine is, why do you care so much about minority issues? You're white. Another microaggression. It's important to note, too, that this project, or what we're doing here, is not about showing how ignorant people are and be able to poo-poo and just, we'll just chalk it up to their ignorance. It's really about us understanding that we are sending them out and to watch what we say. It's not about, you don't have to, I hate that all the time, like walking on eggshells, like I don't know what to say or how to say it. But it is being more conscious of what we're saying. Oftentimes we go to workshops and I always feel, not always, but I feel like I walk away like having all this information and all these stats, and which stats are great, I love them, and data. But I always feel like, or oftentimes feel like, okay, now what can I do about it? I feel so helpless, what can I do? This is something that you can do. You can think about what you're saying. You can think about how those messages that you're sending out and those pokes that you're sending out, those little darts that you could be putting onto somebody else, and it can change how you react and you respond, but it's also changing the people around you. I think about when I'm in a car, that's my worst time of microaggressions. Thankfully, nobody hears them if I'm alone, but I have kids in my car, and I have to think about the things that I'm saying. Oh, look at that, a handicap sticker. Oh, look at that, it's gonna be a slow driver. I do those things, and I don't like it. I don't respect that. I don't love that about myself, but I do it. And I have to think about, I have children in the back that are listening to me. What messages am I sending them? So you can walk out of here with at least something that you can do, which is, I think, is pretty awesome. So you have paper and markers. So what we would like you to do is to think of a microaggression that you've received. We're focusing on racial microaggressions. If you really, really are struggling to think of a racial microaggression, you can think of a gender microaggression. You can think of a socioeconomic, any microaggression that you've received is fine. You don't have to share them, but if you are willing to share them, we would love to snap a pic of you holding your microaggression, so that we have examples and really put this out there for people to see, like that the words that they're saying are impacting people, and impacting people in a negative way. So you can go ahead and work on that.
And if you're still writing, continue to finish that out, because we would love to take some photos of you. We've got some volunteers from Grand Valley State University here that will be roaming around taking some photos of you, so thank you to those folks from Grand Valley. This is a very broad topic, and we could probably spend an hour just talking about microaggressions and having you share those microaggressions, but in the sake of time, we're going to move on. And I just want to talk a little bit about why we chose this topic for this Lunch and Learn. As I mentioned before, we had 2 Lunch and Learns previously, and we always ask you for your feedback about what types of topics you'd like to see covered in these Lunch and Learns, what types of things you'd like to have answered, and that was the reason we chose this event and this topic for this event. So your feedback really drove how we wanted to approach this Lunch and Learn here, which was scheduled for January, but because of Mother Nature, we had to postpone it till today. And I want to remind you that there's green sheets of paper and more evaluations for you to fill out at the end of this event. As you listen to our panelists and have ideas for future Lunch and Learns, please share that with you and with us and fill out those evaluations. But we do want to allow you some time to provide some feedback and help us shape our next Lunch and Learn event on this topic. Because it is so broad, we couldn't fit everything in to today. Today we're going to focus on some of the data that's around disparities in substance use behaviors in our youth and some of the cultural influences that may play a role in that. But our next one, which is scheduled for November 18th, about the same time as this one, which is also a Tuesday. We're going to talk more about the environmental and institutional level issues resulting in disparities. So that also could probably be like a week-long session to talk about that. But in order for us to help narrow that focus a little bit, we've put four banners over there. And I'm going to read those to you because my eyesight is not that good to read all those. But what we want you to do is take the sticky notes that are on your table and write down some ideas for those topics. Maybe if you have a panelist in mind, we obviously have great panelists here, but if you have another one in mind that you think would be good at talking about one of those topics, we have questions that come up when you think about those topics that you'd want to have answered in the next Lunch and Learn session. So I'm going to read these. They're 1, 2, 3, 4. Going back in the room. The first one over here is, so if you want to vote for this one, it's inequalities in access to diversions for youth of color, impact role of the court system and law enforcement. So that's an example of kids are treated differently when they get an MIP. So some are sent to diversion programs, others maybe receive a ticket or have to serve some time. Number 2, which is the next one, is the correlation between socioeconomic status and community drug trends. The first part is, does poverty and or wealth impact what drugs different cultures are using? And B, the impact of place or geography, rural, urban, or suburban trends in how kids are using substances. Number 3, back there, is cultural norms, focusing mostly on roles of parents and the community in shaping kids' thoughts around drug use and substance use. And finally, 4, in the very back of the room, is stigma and perceived risk of harm among various cultural groups. So why do some cultural groups maybe think that using substances is not quite as harmful to their health and their future as other cultural groups? So I know that was quick, and hopefully you got that. But if you want to vote, first of all, you just want to vote for which of those you want us to focus on. Second, if you have an idea for a question you want answered or a panelist, that would be good to approach one of those topics. Please write that on your sticky note as you stick it on the banner. So we're going to give you a short period of time to think about that, get up and walk to the banners and place your votes. I realized I never introduced myself before. I just jumped into it. So you're like, who is this kid up here, this guy? Not a kid, I'm very old. My name is Brian Hartle, and I'm an epidemiologist at the Kent County Health Department, and I also work with the Kent County Prevention Coalition, and I handle a lot of their data, as Rachel says, statistics and reports around health data in Kent County. So that's who I am. I apologize for not introducing myself before. As the Kent County Prevention Coalition, we always want to maintain a sense of openness and honesty in our meetings, and I know that race is a very tense issue. It's not something that's easy to talk about, but we really want to encourage open and honest communication here at this forum. And there's a lot of leaders in this room, leaders who can impact how other people feel about race, how your organization talks about race, and how your policies and things like that in your organization. So we really want you to be open and honest today as you go through this next hour or so. And your feelings, it probably stirs up a lot of emotions in all of us, but really, please feel like this is a safe place to get some of that open and honest communication out there. So Shannon wanted me to remind you all of that. So I'm going to put up some data here. Rachel said she doesn't love data, or she likes it, but likes to talk about other stuff as well. But really, this is setting the stage for what we're going to talk about today. And this is a slice out of your community report that you have on your tables. And really, when we look at, in the lower left-hand corner, there's some information on youth alcohol use by race and ethnic group. And then over up the upper right-hand corner, there's information about marijuana use by race and ethnicity. So when we look at Kent County data around substance use trends, we see that with alcohol, Caucasian and Hispanic youth tend to use alcohol both in a 30-day use, like recent use of alcohol, and also binge drinking, which means they drink 4 or 5 or more drinks on any one occasion, like a party or something like that. So you can see there about 15% of Caucasian and 15% of Hispanic youth indicated 30-day use or recent use of alcohol, and about 10% of each group indicates that they had a binge drinking episode in the last 30 days. Compare that to African American youth, you can see that those numbers are much less significant in terms of the alcohol use in African American kids. However, when you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see that marijuana use by African American youth is much higher than those in the other race and ethnic groups. So this is something we're going to talk about today. We're not going to go deep into the data, but just kind of setting the stage for what we're going to talk about today. Why that is, cultural influences, and things like that cause these differences in use among our youth in Kent County. And as you can see, typically we talk about those 3 groups: Caucasians, African Americans, and Hispanics. Asian Americans aren't represented, Native Americans aren't represented, so we're going to talk about that a little bit as well today. Slide. And this is a study that was done by the University of Michigan Mott Children's Hospital. I'm getting louder. And this is a national study. So this is not Kent County data specifically. This is all around the country. And this is a survey that's done with adults and asking them what are their top priority health issues among their kids. And as you can see, across the board, drug abuse is the number 2 health concern among white adults, number 3 health concern by Hispanic adults, and the number 2 health concern among African American adults. So this is something that's nationwide. The kids do it, the parents worry about it, and it's always on the mind of people in the community. So we really want, again, today to talk about this, dig a little deeper, and have you see what you can do as you go out into your daily lives in both your personal and professional careers, and really help to impact views on substance use among youth and impacting those youth behaviors with our kids in Kent County. So I'm going to turn it over to now Val Lego from WZZM. She's going to handle the moderation of our panel today. And again, thank you panelists for being here, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to read quickly the mission statement of today's meeting. County Health Rankings by the University of Wisconsin rank Kent County in the top 15 as it relates to health indicators and outcomes. However, when we look beneath the surface, we see health disparities and realize data unaided can't tell the story alone. As a community, we must dig deeper and look at issues of race, racism, poverty, place, and zip code, and their impact on health disparities in Kent County. This Lunch and Learn Community Forum is meant to help us uncover issues and work together to improve health outcomes for all who call Kent County home, with a special focus on youth and underage substance use. I'm now going to introduce our panelists. At the end, we have Douglas Chung. He is a professor of social work at Grand Valley State University. His specialty areas include social welfare policy, tobacco addiction counseling, and cultural competency. Next to him, we have Ben Bierman. Ben is a child and adolescent psychiatrist and faculty at the University of Michigan Medical School. He serves as a medical director of the Child and Adolescent Inpatient Psychiatric Unit. Next to him is Shannon Wilson. Shannon is the vice president of the Alliance for Health and also serves as the executive director of the Grand Rapids African American Health Institute, otherwise known as GRAHI. Prior to accepting her position in Grand Rapids, Ms. Wilson worked as the state of Michigan's first health disparities epidemiologist. And next to Shannon is Eva Martinez-Dvorsny. Ms. Martinez-Dvorsny is a behavioral health clinician at the, I'm so going to say this wrong, Nottawasapi Huron Band of the Potawatomi Northern Health Center located in Grand Rapids. So thank you all panelists for being here today. And we are going to take a look at what does our data tell us and what it does not tell us. And that's going to be the focus of the questions. Each panelist will get a chance to answer 4 questions. And what we're hoping is that there will be some time left at the end so that anybody who has questions will be able to answer those as well. So you do hopefully still have some Post-it notes left. So if you've got some questions, maybe when we wrap up, you can just have them at the table and we'll have Brian run and get them, and we'll answer as many as we can with the time we have left. The first question: why do certain populations appear to be more vulnerable to certain substances? What are protective and risk factors that may influence data trends that we see?
Among the Asian family, we have a very, very strong family value. We call the face value. In other words, if the kid misbehave, well, you will have a hard time. The family members are supposed not to talk to the outsider without the permission of a family head. Therefore, lots of information probably have a hard time to get the real story within the Asian community or in the family, because kids are not allowed to talk about those issues, and it's directly related to the family face value. And then so if it's a negative scenes within the family member are hesitant to talk about it, except you have the permission from the family head. And so that's the one of the things that probably another issue, another factor is that the status of the Asian American. It may quite different between the professional. The Asian American more like a bipolar, either a professional or down below as a restaurant operator or the refugee. So, and these two populations are quite different in terms of the social behavior and how they behave, how they think. So, and I think I will left more time for my colleagues here.
So this is a really complex question about why certain populations are more vulnerable, and there's many, many variables that go into this. Just a couple thoughts that I would share up front. I think issues of any kind of mental health issue, and especially substance abuse issue, carries with it a certain stigma. It's okay to seek help and get intervention if you have things like diabetes, cancer, high blood pressure. That's okay, but to come forward and talk about, make public, make known that there are problems of substance abuse or psychiatric disorders is a societal taboo. And then within certain cultures, it's even more highly stigmatized. So that's certainly one of the things that I see. Additionally, when it comes to like certain substances of abuse, so for example, alcohol versus marijuana, there are actually some biological differences that make certain populations, certain racial and ethnic groups more susceptible to abusing certain substances. For example, folks of Asian descent tend to metabolize alcohol slower. And so alcohol isn't always pleasurable for Asians. And data bears that out, and that's something I've learned from some of the young people that I work with. In Ann Arbor, for example, there's a large Asian American population, and so I see a lot of kids of Asian descent. And they tend to not prefer alcohol. I think a lot of vulnerability tends to be genetic. So if one's parent is a substance abuser, that individual is more likely to be a substance abuser. There's also community factors. So certain substances are available in certain communities. Around the Ann Arbor area, for example, there's a surge of heroin use, but that's not the case in other communities. And I'm not sure that breaks down among racial and ethnic groups as much as it is community-based. So this is a very, very complex question, and I'm not sure that there is a good answer to it. I would say that some of the protective factors among many communities are a sense of culture and family as a support. So the very things that might drive certain behaviors can also be protective and encourage people to get help or treatment. One barrier across all groups is the unavailability of interventions and lack of treatment resources.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Okay. Sorry. So I concur the comments made by the panelists before me, and I honestly don't know that I like the term vulnerability here. I kind of feel like for some populations, the data does show us, and so the data, it's not up there anymore, but the data that you have in front of you does show that African Americans are more likely to use marijuana at a younger age, or younger African Americans are more likely to use marijuana, and whites and Hispanics more likely to use alcohol. But I would challenge you as you begin to look at the data to again put it in perspective. So I'm an epidemiologist by training, look at the source. And so who are we looking at when we look at this data? And so a lot of the data before you is survey data, which means that the students themselves are answering that question. And where are the students coming from? Because like we've already stated, a lot of the issues with substance abuse are neighborhood related. And so we know that neighborhood is often a risk factor. We also know socioeconomic status can be a risk factor, and so all of these things are playing in as well. I think that particularly in the African American community, academic achievement is something that has been shown to be a protective factor in terms of preventing substance abuse, and that things such as peer usage and acceptability have been known to be risk factors for that population. And would just encourage you to put it in perspective and think about what are the messages that those teens or those youth are getting on a daily basis. How is that affecting whether or not they think underage, or I guess it's not underage usage of marijuana usage period, is acceptable. And so what type of messages are we sending those populations? Are they more likely to report usage because they think it is acceptable? Are they more likely to report usage because they think that is a social norm for their race? And so those are just things that I would encourage you to think about as you begin to put data in perspective.
See if mine's working. Good job. I'm going to use the language, and I'm going to speak a entirely different language, and I explained this to the panelist team that I'm sitting with. And I'm going to introduce data differently. And the reason that I'm doing this is to bring you in to what we call our circle of healing. And talking about empirical data that is so foreign amongst the Native American communities. And what I want to do is give you an example. Picture the top level. Picture your administration, which is a language you understand when right now you're at a meeting, you're coming to a staff meeting or a gathering. And then visualize the ground level. This is where data ends up. It's supposed to start at the ground level and it goes to the top level. In between are all of yous, including myself and my team here. When you sit with individuals and families in Native American language, we are communities. We're always communities. We're not an individualistic society, never have been. And there's a language that's used as you learn more about the word empirical data. Please, if you're looking for research to find out more why Native Americans aren't in the outcome data, measurable data, is that historically, we, similar to the Jew communities, similar to many other cultural communities, we've been a traveling community. We're all over. I want to ask a question so that I'm bringing you in the circle instead of just me talking. How many of you, just raise your hand, if you know how many tribes are in the state of Michigan? Very good. Anybody else? I was going to say Rebecca. So 3. Very good. Now, I'm bringing you into my circle, and together we're gonna bring together data. Did you see how many tribes existed in Michigan? Your state representatives, unless they attend political meetings, would not know this. The year that they originated, how strong they are, how large their population is, and what is the county areas that they serve. So moving forward, think of the word data. There was 3 people in the room that know 12 sovereign tribes exist. There's a history, it's called historical trauma. Has anybody heard that language? Very good. Now we're coming back home. We call that coming home. In the healing communities, when you're working with the Native American population, you're always using not a broad language, but you're using a circular language, and that is, we're a healing community. And this is very, very important. Empirical data is important. I'm not against it, so please don't take that from this panelist. I'm using language that only the Native Americans will use when you're meeting with them, when you're asking questions and you want to learn what is the measurable outcome. That won't work. It will for those that are in an academic setting, but it won't work for the healers. They'll want to know, like, where were you last? What meeting did you last go to? What event? What's your cultural purpose? It's going to always realm back to the word cultural. So where is the word culture in gathering measurable data? Interesting, in the 50s, that was a very strong word, cultural data. This is where it began. Actually, that were the early years I was born. And now we're in 2000, moving to 2020, and we're asking the same question. The researcher that I want to contribute to for me being able to share this is Marie Yellow Horace Braveheart. She's gathering some very rich information, some very rich data that brings the past to the present, but doesn't let us forget that the future is the future. We are in the here and now as a community. So similar to the African American and the Jews, the village concept is very important for healing. And the reason that I brought this is called sweetgrass. The reason that I brought this is because when I'm asked to speak, and Rebecca invited me, and Rebecca gifted me with this. So when we're talking about a healing community, no one person ever takes the concept of, I have the knowledge, I know. I'm only one small person that speaks for many people before me, and I have to be careful because my ancestors are watching me.
Eva, I want to thank you for this wonderful explanation. We're going to move on now to question 2, and keep in mind everything that you've told us as you begin to answer these questions moving forward. Question 2 is, why is data always presented in terms of Caucasian, African American, and Hispanic teens, and why are Native American and Asian youth missing from the data? Dr. Chung?
In order to answer this question, it's a really a very, very complicated issue. Let me give you a historical fact. During the 1949 to 1957, less than about 8-year period of time, that Communist China took over the China and chasing the national Chinese to Taiwan. 14 million of Chinese being persecuted. They had to be gone. Otherwise, they don't feel, the new party, they don't feel comfortable to stabilize their regime. And that's why the majority of Asian Americans keep low profile, silent, because if you talk out, they will classify you in your documentation. You are belong to this black number 1 category, black number 2 category, black number 3 category, so on and so forth. When the next movement comes, class number 1, go, class number 2, go. So those survivors who come into United States looking for American dream, the first thing they teach their next generation is, don't talk about politics, you shut up your mouth. Because if you talk out, you belong to a Republican or you belong to a Democrat, next round, when the Democrat become the ruler of the White House, hey, your daddy is belong to the Republican, my head may be separate from my body. Do you understand that serious issue? Therefore, parents would tell their kids, you don't talk about politics. But they didn't know Republican and Democrat in the United States, every 4 years they can be rotated peacefully. But in their lifelong experience, it's terrible if the regime, if the government is changed. Boy, I and my family could be all gone. 6 million of Jews been persecuted during the World War II. But only the one dynasty of the government change in China causes for 14 million population to be gone. And it's not only in China, in the other Asian countries have a similar situation comes out. Whenever there's a civil war, there is a mass killing going on. And that's the number one issue.
Dr. Chang, I want to thank you for that.
Yep, thank you.
It's been a great history lesson, I think, for all of us to learn a little bit more about the cultures and why they respond the way they do to data gathering. And so we're going to move on with Ben.
I can speak to the survey that was done at the University of Michigan. This sample was a nationwide sample, so it didn't specifically target or look at or focus on any particular ethnic group or racial makeup. And so if you look at the percentages of the population in the United States, it's about 70% Caucasian and about in the teens, 13% African American and Hispanic, about 5% Asian, and about 1.5% Native American. So within a random sample of 1,000 people in the United States, the chances of having an Asian person or a Native American answering the question would be low. And so the study that was presented today did not exclude any particular group or population. However, there were small numbers of respondents, and so it's hard to present the data in a way that represents each group. I think that if studies are designed to look at a particular community or a particular racial or ethnic group, they have to specifically be designed to ask questions to particular individuals and try to stratify the sample in a way that more meaningfully represents the population at large. So that's the simple explanation.
So I will pick up where you left off. I think that that's basically the general explanation overall, is that the sample size just isn't large enough. And so I led the effort by the state of Michigan to begin collecting data by race and ethnicity about 10 years ago. Now I'm aging myself. About 10 years ago. And so I don't want people to get the misconception that the desire to have that data is not there. The desire is there. It's just when you're actually running the data and you're looking at the data, if we don't have enough of a particular population, we can't report that information. It's not statistically significant. We don't have the power in the study to get that done. And so that's getting a little into the weeds, but that's really why it's not done. And so usually the data is collected. Ways that we can move around that is to think about some untraditional ways to tell, to explain the data. So it may be through the art of storytelling. And so oftentimes telling the story is just as effective as giving the data, but in a different way. And so storytelling is something that we can do with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 stories that still is able to get that message out, as opposed to having enough collective data to be able to report it in a report. I would also say that one of the ways that we can get around this problem is to continue to advocate for more money. So ultimately, it comes down to money, right? Like everything else. A lot of this data is collected at the state level. A lot of this data is collected nationally. And in order to get down into some of the smaller populations, we need more money to be able to translate. When we're looking at Native youth, but particularly the Asian populations, I mean, they lump a lot of stuff into Asian. And so I see a lot of heads nodding. So, I mean, that could be anything from Cambodia to Japan to China. I mean, there's just a lot of groups that are lumped into Asian. And so that could be many different translations of a survey. That could be who is giving the survey. And all of that requires money to get done. And so one of the things you can do is go to your, did I see my yellow? Okay. One of the things you can do is go to your legislators and advocate for additional collection of this information. Because having worked at the state and federal levels, that is who you all are who guides the work that we do. And so if there is a big enough push for collection of that data, then that will start to get the attention of those who need to get that attention. And we can start to get some of those things done. Thanks.
Thank you. One of the things that Shannon mentioned that helped me out with this next question is tribal, which is federal, state government relationships. Once we start getting data that includes, like I said, the circle of care that we use often, is that it's very important. That's why data is missing, especially with families in the tribal communities, is because they're federally recognized tribes, so they're federal family members. State does not sometimes acknowledge that, and whether that's political, I don't know. I'm on the hands-on field, and I enjoy that. So back to youth missing, that's very important. It's something that we are raising on a continuum, and we will not stop addressing, is taking care of our youths in the future. So we will do anything we can to be helping and assisting with that. Again, federal tribes have numbers, they have names, very tight-knit communities. So if there's a relationship building, a bridge building firmer, closer, then this data should be able to come together, hopefully real soon.
All right, thank you for those answers. Moving on to question 3. Cultural competence in data gathering. What are the gaps? Present protocol. Who's asking the questions, wording the questions? Is there bias? What can we do, and how can we expand cultural competence in data gathering and reporting? Dr. Chung?
I would practically suggest, if you are going to collect the data from Asian American, hire the Asian American to collect data. That's probably much easier. Second one, if you had to use in Caucasian or other racial personnel to collect the data, I would suggest that you provide a culturally competent training before they go out. First of all, for example, you have to gain the family head agreement in collecting the data. Is very, very important. Without a family head agreement, those family members is hesitant to give out those information, particularly black that relate to the family faith, family values, family success or failure, have a negative impact on Asian American reputation, then people are hesitant to provide that information. So there is a lot of factors that may impact the Asian American willing to provide the information. Because, as I mentioned before, it's not only the simple answer the question. There is a lot of psychological, economical, political, and cultural dynamic involved. So best example, my best suggestion for me is either receiving the training for cultural competence training in order to collect the data, that the collector know how to approach the Asian American. or best way would be hire an Asian American to correct those information. That's my suggestion.
It's a good suggestion, Dr. Chung. Ben?
I would agree with that suggestion. I think the people that design studies need to incorporate individuals from various groups to look at such simple things as how to word questions, who would actually ask them. Would you have somebody answer on a computer? Would it be better to talk to them face to face? Do people like to talk in numbers and data? Or is information more meaningful if it's presented in a story or a narrative or an example? Because there are various beliefs about what data is meaningful. I love the example of the Native American community. I mean, community is the key word in that. And so that in itself might influence how you would gather data, who you would choose to ask the questions. I looked online at some of the major organizations that do research on drug abuse and substance abuse. The National Institute on Drug Abuse does have 5 different task forces. That's a tongue twister. Task forces that looks at various racial and ethnic groups. So there's Asian and Pacific Islander, there's Native American, there's Alaskan Native, and then blacks and Hispanics. There are separate task forces that are addressing this question about how we gather, how data should be gathered among various groups. And I think that line of thinking is very important. In the Michigan study, they oversampled African American and black and Hispanic respondents, but didn't think about Asians or Native Americans. And so that's something to think about going forward.
I would say that there are several gaps in the data that exist, as you can see. I think one of the largest ones is the lack of subgroup categorizations. And so that whole thought that we can lump everyone into Hispanic, Latino, and that we see the same outcomes within that group, and that there's no differentiation amongst them, I think is a little short-sighted on our part. I know even there are plenty of examples in substance abuse, but if I give you an example such as asthma, I mean, we see stark differences here in Michigan because we have a majority Mexican American population here in comparison to New York, where they have a larger Puerto Rican population. And so you see these across the board. Present protocols, again, often they're designed by researchers, and so I would push for diversification of researchers. I think that would be a big step, which is again a push for education at all levels. I think when you look at things such as who's asking the questions, we've already said that maybe we might have better outcomes not outcomes, but better uptake of surveys and things of that nature if we had people asking the questions that look like those who were being asked the questions. And so that kind of leads me to one of the things that I'm a big proponent of, which is community-owned research. And so maybe not having researchers come in and survey our communities, but having the community say, this is what we're interested in knowing about ourselves. How do we hire researchers to come in? And the community actually owns that research. And so I think that's a model that may help alleviate some of these questions and concerns. But in the wording of questions, most of the questions that you see on many surveys are questions that have been vetted, questions that are put before research panels, and they work through the wording, and they put it before a group who vets it. And then in communities such as ours, where we may not have the resources to do that much detailed work, we use those questions that are already existing. And so we will, I wouldn't call it stealing, we borrow questions from other communities or other larger surveys, and we reuse them here because of the IRB, which is a long process. But in order to get that through and to have research that is accurate and justifiable and all of that good stuff, we need to make sure that those questions have been vetted. And so that process in and of itself is long and expensive. And so one way around that is to use already vetted questions. And those are often not done in communities of color. They're often not questions that are developed by communities of color. And so that, to me, is another area where we could improve. But again, I think it goes back to who owns that research and who's asking these questions and what are the things that we want to know about ourselves.
Okay, cultural competency and data gathering. Again, this goes back to wording, language, biases. Language, 12 tradition versus the red road to recovery. Well, variety. It is the red road and it is 12 steps, but it doesn't use the word God, higher power. It uses the circle of healing language. For instance, talking circles, smudging, sharing, community-based. So cultural competency is going to be a little bit more involved if we're talking about gathering data. Wording important. Protocol. I'd say safe protocol would be meeting the community where they're at, kind of like you do with motivational interviewing. Very important that you meet the community where they're at. If you're asking questions that doesn't relate to their historical background or language barriers, county areas, you're not going to get appropriate data. Very, very important to look at that before you start moving into gathering data. And then I'll close up with wording the questions. Wording the questions not to be so much correct as to be sensitive. Not biased, whereas it's who's this going to land to, what is the purpose of getting this data? There's a lot of mistrust with cultural communities, especially with Native Americans, because they've been non-Christian based. So there's been this hesitancy to meet the healing circle. And finalizing that, again, I want to go back to youths because they are the future. If all the populations, I'd like to see it start with youths in gathering data.
I just want to take a minute. We're going to move on to our final question. Is there anyone that does have questions that they would like to ask of the panelists? I'll have Brian run and get some of your Post-its while we're reading this final question and answering it. I do want to, that's okay. We can go back to the question and then I'll read the definitions that are appropriate to the question, right? Is that okay? There, that's okay. So here's question 4. When surveyed, many teens often reference onset of use, particularly for alcohol via cultural and family events. What can be done to promote prevention within cultural and family events like Christmas, New Year's Eve, St. Patrick's Day, and so forth, or advancing trends that foster prevention? And then I'll move on to the definitions that we wanted to include. So behavioral or cultural health is an education discipline that facilitates being in possession of accurate cultural information leading to a productive psychosocial orientation to a culture or cultures. Oops. Behavioral health, the psychological state of someone who is functioning at a satisfactory level of emotional and behavioral adjustment. So back to the question. When surveyed, many teens often reference onset of use, but particularly for alcohol via cultural and family events. And how can we prevent this from happening, and how can we make it a different type of experience for our youth? Dr. Chung?
Within the Asian community, I would suggest that those events to be held in the Asian cultural way. For example, instead of a Christmas party, maybe you want to held in the so-called the Asian New Year's event. There is a popular trend that Asian Americans come to the United States and adopt American custom, such as Christmas party. Within the Christmas party, the majority of the people who participated were involved in the dancing and the drinking. But if we are holding a New Year Eve, which is Asian cultural way of a celebration, then the content of activity could be different. You will be trying to promote the family relationship, the network, friendship, and sharing the good food together instead of promoting the drinking or dancing. So the nature of activity, therefore, could be quite different. The content of activity, and therefore following that activity, the outcome of that activity could be have a positive impact and negative impact. And that would be my practical suggestion. And Asian Center, we are promoting that. Instead of Christmas party, we are providing the New Year Eve or the other festival, the party or something like that. That would be my practical suggestion.
I think it's important to, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but to distinguish between alcohol use and alcohol abuse. Because within many cultures, it's appropriate to have a glass of wine with dinner, to have a toast at a New Year's celebration. And so, you know, as a kid growing up, I saw my family engaging in that kind of alcohol use. And that's a lot different than alcohol abuse, which involves, you know, drinking to intoxication, drinking and driving, engaging in dangerous behaviors, drinking every day, you know, establishing a pattern of abuse. And so I think for most kids, you know, the example that they see that's closest to them is what happens in their own home. And I think, you know, we need to always be talking with parents about responsible, if families decide that alcohol will be used in their home or consumed in their home, to talk about responsible use of alcohol and that sort of thing. It's probably better not to drink alcohol for everybody. I mean, it has some health hazards. But you know, to look at responsible use of alcohol. The other thing, the force that we forget about a lot, I think, is peers and the influence that peers have. I work with adolescents, and adolescence is a time of rebellion. So most teenagers, a lot of teenagers do the opposite of what they see their parents doing. And so I see a lot of kids who come from homes where alcohol is not ever consumed that discover alcohol and you know, want to discover what they're missing and what it's all about. And so I think having an awareness on the part of parents to know what their kids are doing, where they're going, who they're with, observe them, talk to them, because I think a lot of alcohol and other substance use starts out at the peer level rather than at home. I see a lot of kids who come from very traditional backgrounds who rebel against their parents, and kids from other nationalities, for example, a lot of first-generation Asian parents who might have kids who were raised in America, in the United States. And there's a big divide between the values that their parents have and the values that their peers have. And I think the more that we can do to recognize that and meet the adolescents where they are, the young people where they are, talk about those issues, provide education, and look for good peer role models as well as adult role models. Because I think that's the most powerful influence we can have, is the behavior of others.
Okay, I'll try to keep this brief for you. If I could leave you with 3 parting things. First, I would say it takes a village. I think all of us will have a role in making sure that we curb underage drinking and substance abuse. Second, I would say consistent messaging is key. And so we want to make sure that youth are receiving the same message at school, at home, at church, with their community groups. Wherever they go, it's the same messaging. You know, underage alcohol use is bad, and marijuana use, period, is bad. And then finally, I would say talk early and talk often as parents. They're going to get their messages from somewhere. And I think being a parent now, I know I would prefer for my child to get her message from me. And so if we know that the onset of marijuana use, particularly for African Americans, is 13, and I think it's pretty standard across the board, but 13 and 12, then we need to start having these conversations at 8 and 9. And so not waiting till they get to high school when you start thinking about it, but being aware that these are conversations that you need to have early and to have often, because you want that message to come from you. Whatever your value system is, that's what you want to impart to your child early, because they are going to be curious, they are going to ask questions, they're going to seek that information from somewhere, and you don't want them to get that from TV, you don't want them to get that from social norms, you want that to come from yourself.
Yeah, it's going to be much more bigger than just say no to drugs. Been proven that didn't work, just to talk. Now we have to move more towards the walk. With Native Americans, what we're doing is we're working closely again with our communities, by and large. No one is excluded. And in this circle of, we call it circle of care, is positive events. Becky Williams is in the audience, and she's the one who invited me to join in this panel. Becky works with youths, and one of the things that she does, one of the many things she does, is additional clothing regalia. Regalia is a name for traditional clothing for dancing, beadwork, talking circles. We did a healing circle due to the loss of a couple of our young people, and allowing the youth to sit in a circle with the eagle feather and talk about their feelings and smudge and learn that it's okay, we're here for you. This doesn't cost a lot of money. Unfortunately, we often get caught up into talking about timelines and budgets and money, and we're in the aren't we the beer city in Michigan? Yeah, so it would be nice, and I know this is one of my personal goals, is to have the larger communities turn to this, to the larger businesses, especially in the area of substance abuse, and give back to the community, so that we're not doing explaining of how come we don't have the proper data, and that we're also showing the youths that we're here for you. This is what we can do. We have a new addition being added to Big Brothers Big Sisters. We have more functions for the youth to go to, so that Becky and the youths are included, and not always just her taking them to the reservation for events. Let Grand Rapids open their doors more. And not just Grand Rapids, we're talking about counties upon counties.
Thank you, panelists, for answering this afternoon's questions. So we have just a couple? Okay. And these are two different ones? Okay. And this can be, you can all answer it, or you can choose. I'll let you be on your own for this one. The question is, what is the name of the book that Eva referenced and has with her on the table? If you want to hold it up again and tell us what that is.
The Red Road to Sobriety, Don Coyes. It's called The White Bison. For recovery program. They have the age appropriate group for youths as well. Very, very helpful. Very, very good book.
And then my second question is, much of the data we rely upon is through school-based surveys. Do you have any recommendations on how to make these surveys more inclusive to improve responses from underrepresented groups? And thank you for printing that so clearly.
I will speak up for the Asian American, because it really totally not represent in the data or mission. Suggestion, as I made before, is a hire Asian American who know how to approach Asian American. That's one way. Second one, training those surveyor, investigator, researcher in the Asian American cultural way, so they know how to approach. For example, very important, if you have a survey step into the Asian American home, normally, or the majority of Asian American, when they arrive home, they will take off their shoe. Majority of Americans don't, they wear their shoe at their home most time, or many. If you step into the Asian American home with your shoe on, they feel being invaded. Psychologically they don't feel, although they do not say anything, but down bottom in their mind, they don't feel comfortable with you. And if you don't know how to show respect of their grandparent or father or their worship praise, and you miss it, or you even can have misunderstood it or judge it, then you totally lost the respect of that particular family. So there is a lot of cultural sensitivity issues that the researcher need to know and need to be trained. Otherwise, when you go and collect the data of the Asian American, you may get nothing from there. The other one is that the Asian American talking out is a danger to them. It's better to shut up, keep silent, don't participate, because the participation from their life experience, it could be danger and nothing good for them. But with that kind of a cultural, political, economic background, the researcher, when they collect the data, maybe. Another one is that I don't know, the research designer, what kind of sampling do they have? If they say in this area we have a 5% of Asian American exist, would you guarantee to have a 5% of interview or visited, or the people, the sample will come in from Asian American? That is another way to warranty or collect the data from Asian American that they would not miss it. Otherwise, it may be randomly, they just do not pop out. That's my suggestion.
Thank you, Dr. Chung. Ben, did you have a...
Yeah, I wanted to make one comment about collecting data in schools, and I think this is a very, very rich source of information. One of the challenges that I run into, is that schools are very fearful of, leery about asking questions that have to do with mental health issues, substance abuse, behavior problems. It's almost as if the fear is that if you talk about these things, it'll encourage kids to engage in these behaviors. For example, adolescent suicide, this is a big problem, but schools don't want us to talk about it. Same thing with substance abuse. There's a fear that it'll encourage the behavior. And so I think we need to start at the administrative level and do something to somehow communicate the message that these behaviors are already occurring, and that talking about them doesn't encourage them. Rather, it encourages people to have a dialogue and come forward with some of these concerns. I think mental health issues and substance use go hand in hand. So a lot of kids, young people that are using substances, are self-medicating depression, anxiety, trauma. And so we need to ask some of the difficult questions and ask them of everybody in the school setting.
I think it's important to also make sure that we're doing supplemental data collection, and so not just relying on the schools for that source of data. And I know here in Grand Rapids we do some supplemental data collection on youth, but to encourage that across the board.
I'd like to finish by saying that, again, it goes back to wording. What is cultural competency? What are you looking for? Percentile is important, but what are you actually looking for? Are you looking for the money? Are you looking to become more culturally competent? Are you looking for the future? Are you in the here and now? So these are things to think about when we're talking about cultural competency, data, assessments, what population, the ages, the mental health, and where are we going with this information.
Any other questions? Well, I just want to take a moment to thank the panelists for spending time with us today and for giving us such great answers.
Okay, well, thanks Val, and thanks to the panelists again. And now Denise is going to give us a little bit of info on what we can do. How do we get involved with the Kent County Prevention Coalition and other initiatives in the community to look at more of these issues?
Hello, everyone. We're in the home stretch. Okay, just stay with us, stay with us. On the screen, it says action. So today, it was all about the race, the culture, and health. And we heard a lot of information today. So how many of you have learned something new as you're leaving? Okay, absolutely, so that feels good. What we do know and what research tells us is that the problems and the solutions can be found in the same place. And you've heard a lot of our panelists say that this afternoon. So your charge today is really to take action, as you know, as that slide says. So it's time for you to take action, and it's time for you to be responsible for what you've heard today. So many of us, we can take that responsibility and go back into our communities and take some action. So your charge today is to take ownership on what you've heard today. Your charge is to do something as you leave. Do something, take action, respond on what you've heard today. And then also your charge is to get involved. So at your table, you have actually a couple different pieces of information. At your table, you have information on the health equity and social justice workshop, and there's some listed dates there. So that's a way for you to take action and to get involved. And then also at your desk, thinking about work, at your table, there's also some cards that says, make your voice be heard. There's a community health survey that is going on currently, so let your voice be heard. Actually, there's an opportunity for you to win a mini iPad as well, so that gives you, that incentive to take some action. Again, let your voice be heard. And we're asking you to get involved with the coalition as well. We have monthly meetings. We meet on the third Tuesday of every month at 12 o'clock. So visit our website and you'll see the locations there. We have an annual meeting that's coming up on September 30th. So that will give you an opportunity to learn some more information and to get involved with the work that we're doing. Also at your place, there is information to get youth involved. So we want everyone to let their voice be heard. We want everyone to be involved. So that gives you information about the Youth Coalition. We have all of your emails, so we will be sending you some e-news. So we're just challenging you, when you get that information, to open that email and to respond on what you're reading there. And I'm going to leave you with, everyone has the power to take some action. So as you leave today, just be committed to take some action. Okay. Last, you have a green sheet of paper, and that's your evaluation of today's workshop. We're asking you to complete that and hand that in at the registration desk as you get your certificates. Are there any questions before you are dismissed? Okay, Michelle is reminding me to remind you about your signage to take pictures in the hallway if you would like to have your voice heard. Shannon is being our Vanna White in the back there. And before you leave, if you would, fill out your posties and answer some of those questions to give us some ideas on our next workshops. Anything else? Okay, I think we're all set. Thank you for coming and have a great afternoon.